Dead America. Survivor Stories. Mary. By Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Smitty's Bar, Seattle Safe Zone, 2:13 p.m. Half a dozen people sat around the back table of Smitty's bar, tossing back drinks and living their best life. In the pre-apocalypse days, a crowded bar in the middle of the afternoon would have been a rare occurrence, but with no work schedules to keep, it was becoming a more common scene. Smitty leaned up against the back bar, grinning from ear to ear at the sight. He continued smiling as the front door opened, revealing a young dark-haired woman. "Come on in, welcome to my bar," Smitty said. Mary looked at the smiling bartender with a hint of confusion. "Are you Smitty?" "The one and only." "I guess you are because Katie said you'd say that." Mary walked over to the bar, hopping onto a stool and leaning forward. Smitty pushed off the back, standing tall as he gave her a curious look. "You seem surprised that I am who I am," Smitty said. "Katie said you were a little on the serious side, so I wasn't expecting to see the smiling bartender when I came in." "Oh, that. My apologies." Mary let out a bit of a laugh as she continued. "I mean, you don't have to apologize for smiling. It just caught me off guard, that's all." Truth be told, it kind of caught me off guard as well. "So what brought it on, if you don't mind me asking?" Before Smitty could answer, the large table in the back erupted with laughter. A couple of the patrons smacked their hands on the table in a fit of joy, forcing the bartender to wait until they calmed down to answer. "That group back there put me in a good mood," Smitty said. "Their laughter does seem infectious." "It's not that, well, not exactly that." "So what is it then?" "A few of the people back there haven't seen each other since all this began. They didn't even know that their friends had survived until one of their mutual friends saw their names in the census files. So seeing them reunite and just enjoy the afternoon like there's not a care in the world brought a smile to my face." "Yeah, I get that, Smitty. And frankly, it's good to see that kind of magic still happens in this world." "I agree wholeheartedly." Smitty paused for a moment, as if he was silently asking for the young woman's name. She quickly picked up on it and responded. "I just realized I waltzed in here and started talking to you like you're my old friend, and I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Mary." "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mary. And since you name-dropped Katie, I'm assuming you're here to take me up on my story offer. If you have the time to hear it." Smitty smiled and reached underneath the counter, pulling out the tape recorder, setting it in front of Mary. "So what's your pleasure?" "Bourbon neat. Coming right up." Smitty reached up to the top shelf, grabbing a nearly full bottle of bourbon. He held it up for Mary to look over, receiving a thumbs up from her. With a twist of the top, he began pouring a generous portion into a glass before sliding it over to her. "Are you ready to get started? Fire up the recorder and let's go." Smitty nodded and reached down, clicking the device on. Before she could start talking, they were interrupted by another loud round of laughter coming from the back. Smitty nodded his head to the side, prompting Mary to get up and move to the far end of the bar. "I'll stand between you and them, so we should be just fine. So you can begin whenever you like." "Okay, well, here we go. My name is Mary, and my story takes place in Wichita on the morning after all of this started. So I was sleeping at the top of a light pole when I was awoken by." Mary trailed off when she saw Smitty's hand go up in the air. "Yes, Smitty?" "I'm sorry, maybe I misheard, but did you say you were sleeping at the top of a light pole?" "Nope, you heard me correctly." "Would you mind backing up your story a bit? Because I feel like we missed something." Mary thought about it for a moment before letting out a chuckle. She nodded and took a sip of her bourbon before starting over. "Okay, let's try this again. My name is Mary, and my story takes place in Wichita on the morning this all started. Day 0. Mary moved slowly, leaning back into the driver's seat of the car. Her head pounded from the impact of the airbag that had recently deployed. She sat there in a daze for several moments, trying to regain her composure. Damn brake checkers. Mary reached down for the door handle, only to stop abruptly when someone began slamming their hands angrily against the window. She recoiled from the sudden noise, reaching down in a panic to make sure the doors were locked. The banging against the window continued unabated, but curiously, no yelling joined it, confusing Mary. Usually, when people were angry enough to attack a driver, high-volume cursing was typically a part of the equation. Mary regained her senses, looking over to the window, ready to hold her own in the disagreement over whose fault the accident was. Before she could speak up, however, she noticed the assailant was badly mangled. "My God, how are you still standing?" Mary rubbed her eyes, hoping that she was just feeling the effects of the accident. After several moments, it was clear that something was very wrong with the person. Blood soaked the front of their tattered shirt, pouring out of a wound on their shoulder. The injury did not deter them from continuing their assault on her vehicle. A moment later, Mary's attention was drawn to the car in front of her when a man yelled out. She watched helplessly as the passenger threw open the door and began running to the open area just off the street. Within seconds, half a dozen zombies broke away from the pileup, chasing him down. The man's feet became entangled with those of a creature, sending him falling face first in the grass. Before he could even attempt to get up, the ghouls pounced on him, ripping flesh from bone. Holy shit! Mary's blood ran cold as her new reality quickly sank in. She rubbed her head again, trying to push the fogginess caused by the wreck out. While struggling to do so, another person screamed from behind her. Mary looked in her rearview mirror, watching as two people ran across the street towards a row of houses. 4 creatures followed closely, moving at an alarmingly fast speed. She tracked their movement until they made it to the front yard, only to be met by another couple of zombies emerging from between the houses. "You need to think, Earl. This is not a good place to be," Mary muttered. Mary let out a pained grunt as her mind raced for ideas. Her first instinct was to reach for the keys in the ignition, turning them forcefully. Rather than the satisfying hum of an engine, an expensive-sounding clicking sound bellowed from the front of her car. Well, so much for that. Mary looked around her car, spotting her phone that had been flung into the floorboard. Can't hurt to call the police. Mary reached over, grabbing her phone off the floor, clicking it on, and dialing 911. Much to her surprise, it began ringing. However, after the 6th ring, it dawned on her that nobody was going to pick up. Either they're really busy, or nobody's home. Not sure either is good. Mary slid the phone into her pocket before looking around at her surroundings, hoping to spot someplace to go. To her right stretched open fields running 100 yards or so, butting up against an industrial area. Even with a head start, you're not outrunning those people. And even if you did, there's not much over there. Mary looked to her left, seeing a few more wrecked cars and a row of houses on the other side. The distance was more manageable, only 30 yards, but zombies were running rampant. From her vantage point, she counted 12 before giving up on that idea. Mary turned her focus towards the street ahead, hoping that some beacon of hope would reveal itself. The traffic jam straight ahead held nothing but wrecked cars and zombie-fueled mayhem. As she stared out into the abyss, however, a silver glimmer of hope caught her eye. Standing tall on the side of the road was a metal light pole, leaning ever so slightly due to a car pressed up against the base. A couple of zombies clambered around the vehicle, but none were standing between her and the pole. This is a bad idea. Mary trailed off, letting out a sigh before looking into the back seat towards a canvas bag. But it's the only idea I have. Mary grabbed the bag, pulling it into the front seat, ripping it open to reveal bundles of climbing rope and other supplies. She pulled out a large, thick strap, wrapping one end around her arm. The creature beside the car continued slamming its hands against the window, now nearly obscured from view thanks to the blood smeared on the glass. No sense in being polite. Mary dug into the bottom of the bag, pulling out a sharp climbing axe. She stared at it for a few moments before nodding to herself. Just remember, you didn't start this, but you'll finish it if you have to. Mary sat there for another few moments, psyching herself up to make the run. More screaming from across the street shocked her into moving, causing her to climb over into the passenger seat and throw open the door. She pushed any semblance of thought out of her mind, relying on pure instinct. She got to her feet outside the car, slamming the door shut before running hard towards the light pole. The creature that had been trying to break in through the driver's side window took notice, chasing after her. Mary glanced over her shoulder, watching as the zombie banged its knee on the front bumper, sending it tumbling to the ground and buying her a few precious seconds. She picked up as much speed as she could, completely unconcerned about the noise her feet on the pavement made. Mary lined herself up with the rear of the wrecked car, a tinge of fear infecting her as one of the ghouls took notice of her. In a flash, it lost interest in the occupants of the car, focusing entirely on her. Mary darted to her right, watching as the creature matched her movements. She allowed her instincts to continue driving her actions, darting back to the left as the ghoul got within arm's reach. She felt its bloody fingertips scraping up against her arm as she passed. She continued pumping her legs hard, pushing off the pavement and leaping up onto the back of the car. Rather than slow down and approach the pole, she leapt off the roof, getting several feet in the air before bare hugging the pole, sticking to it like a fly on a glue trap. The sudden movement above drew the attention of the creatures below, all of whom swarmed the bottom of the pole, reaching up for the exposed treat. Mary kept her feet wrapped up tight, holding herself in place on the pole, mere inches away from the outstretched hands of the creatures. "Don't look down, girl. Just don't look down." Mary moved quickly, unfurling the band around her arm and swinging it around the pole, grabbing it with her free hand. It took a moment to get herself into climbing position, holding onto the band to lean back and plant the soles of her feet against the metal. "One step at a time. You got this." Mary flung the band upwards, dragging it a few feet up the pole before walking up with it. Within minutes, she ascended to the top of the light pole, pausing at the top to look around from her new elevated vantage point. Zombies swarmed the streets below, dozens of them running in every direction in search of fresh meat. Across the field towards the industrial district, she spotted several plumes of black smoke rising. A couple of helicopters fluttered around in the distance, but none close enough for her to signal. "Well, looks like you're not going anywhere anytime soon, so you might as well set yourself up a nest and get comfortable." Chapter 2. Mary watched from her perch high atop the light pole as the sun bid farewell for the day. Despite the horrific events happening below her, Mother Nature was putting on a spectacular show, illuminating the sky with brilliant hues of red and orange. Mary soaked it all in, staring out over the industrial area that had fallen mostly quiet. No more plumes of smoke, no more helicopters in the sky, just colorful beauty. Her enjoyment didn't last for too long, however, as the bright streetlight hummed to life, blinding her momentarily. "Oh, come on, you couldn't have given me a few more minutes of that?" Mary muttered. She shook her head in disgust as she looked down at her climbing lines. She was an experienced climber, but had always been adamant about rope safety. She had 2 separate lines wrapped around her waist, both of which were secured by anchor lines that had been pushed into the light post itself. Years of use had taken its toll on the post, causing some minor rusting, as well as bolts being removed without being replaced. While they weren't ideal for anchors, it was a lot better than nothing. As a failsafe, she had both lines wrapped around the extended portion of the pole. With a final tug, she convinced herself it was as safe as it was going to get. "Well, at least it's a nice night out," Mary said. She forced herself to laugh, trying to make her mind focus on anything other than her dire situation. Despite her best effort, the moaning coming from below drew her attention. With a deep sigh, she looked down at the crowd of ghouls that had converged around the wrecked car at the base of the pole. The streetlight humming to life revealed just how bad the situation on the ground was. Dozens of ghouls were intently focused on her, reaching up to the sky for her. The occupant of the car was no different, a bloody bite victim slamming her hands against the windshield, growing more and more agitated with each blow. Mary continued staring down at the mob, as if she were staring into the abyss. The artificial light cast an eerie glow on the creatures, reflecting in their dead eyes, almost making them appear lifelike. Her trance-like state broke when her phone unexpectedly began to ring. She fumbled about for a moment, digging the device out of her pocket, clicking answer without looking at the screen. "Hello?" she answered. "Mary? Mary, are you okay?" Jennifer's voice came through. A sense of relief washed over Mary's face as she recognized her sister's voice coming through the other end of the line. "Jennifer, you're alive. I've been so worried about you, sis. I've been calling all day, but the lines have been tied up. I thought I'd never get a hold of you. Are you okay? Are you someplace safe? Mary let out a bit of a horrid chuckle, looking around at her current situation and shrugging as she responded. In a manner of speaking, those people can't reach me, and that's all that really matters at the moment. Jennifer paused for a long moment, trying to decipher Mary's cryptic response. After a bit of contemplation, she decided not to push the issue. I'm glad you're safe. What about you and the boys? Are you somewhere safe? Mary asked. Yeah, we're okay, we're home. We were running late this morning, so the boys weren't out at the bus stop when. Jennifer trailed off, her mind revolting at being forced to revisit the horrific memory. She whimpered a bit before pulling it together and continuing. Some of those people showed up. After seeing that, I locked the house up tight, and we haven't been outside since. Good. Do you have food? Water? Mary asked. Yeah, we have plenty of both. We filled up a few extra containers in case the water goes out. Good. You're in Kansas City, so it can't be too long before someone comes in to help. Just sit tight, and you'll be okay. Mary knew the words she was saying were most likely bullshit, but she also knew it was what her sister needed to hear. I hope you're right, sis. I am, Jennifer. Just sit tight, and you'll be okay. What about you? Do you have food and water? Jennifer asked. I got enough to get me through the night. What about for tomorrow? You know me, sis. I'm not going to worry about tomorrow until I make it there. If it's all the same to you, I'll do the worrying for the both of us. Before Mary could respond, she heard the line blip, as if another call was coming in on Jennifer's end. Oh my God, I have to go, sis. Mom's calling. Hopefully she's just hearing about this on the news and it isn't happening down in Florida. I hope so too. Be safe tonight, and I'll talk to you soon. I love you, sis. Love you too. A moment later, the line fell silent. Mary let out a sigh as she looked up to the corner of her phone, spotting that the power was under 30%. This is what I get for not upgrading my phone. Mary let out a deep sigh, staring up into the night sky and trying not to feel defeated. As she sat on top of the pole, she reached into her climbing bag, digging around for a moment before pulling out a smushed-up protein bar. Well, guess it's time for my final meal. She peeled open the wrapper, which was embedded firmly in the bar after weeks of being at the bottom of her bag. Despite the misshapen nature of the treat, she enjoyed the first bite immensely. So, Mary, how are you getting out of this one? She looked down to the ground at the sea of hands reaching skyward for her, trying to plot out a potential path through. The first thing she noticed was that none of the creatures were up on the car. It looks like getting down safely is an option, but then you'll be trapped on the roof of a car. She looked into the darkness, squinting her eyes in an attempt to get an idea of what lurked just beyond the reach of the streetlight. She could make out the outlines of wrecked vehicles, spotting movement in between them. Anything passed that was impossible to make out, however. Okay, girl, talk it through. Let's say you manage to get over to the line of wrecked cars. Then what? Maybe you can get to the front end of the line? And? Then what? Mary sat there, staring off into the darkness, trying to envision any conceivable idea that would give her hope. Despite her best efforts, she came up empty. Maybe you can beat them in a foot race. Surely there's someplace out there that would make for a good finish line. Mary thought about it for a few moments before going into a fit of laughter, shaking her head at the suggestions her mind was coming up with. Yeah, there's bound to be a fully stocked bar with a kitchen on the next block, complete with a hot bartender that's a fan of body shots. Her amusement faded as reality began to creep back in. Let's be real, girl. At this point, you'll settle for a convenience store and a pack of crackers. But even that seems like a pipe dream. Mary let her mind drift for a short while, not wanting to confront her reality. A reality that provided no safe haven, no escape from the flesh eaters below. As she disassociated from the moment, a flickering caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. Mary looked over towards the row of houses across the street, immediately spotting a flashing light coming from the second floor of one. At first, she thought it was an automatic light blinking, but quickly realized it was something else. "Well, what do we have here?" Mary muttered. She reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone and clicking on the flashlight function. She held the light up towards the house, waving her hand in front of her device to signal whoever was across the street. Within seconds, the light across the street vanished. "I guess they got shy," she said. A few moments later, a brighter light illuminated a second-floor bedroom, revealing a young teenage girl sitting by the window. It was a little difficult for Mary to make out, as a large tree branch obscured her view, but the young girl was there, clear as day. Mary pulled her phone up again, going to the camera function and zooming in as much as she could. Once she had the young girl in view, Mary waved, receiving one in return. She did her best to hold the phone steady, watching the teenager reach out for something against the wall. It was hard for her to make out exactly what she was doing, but it became clear when she spun around a whiteboard and held it against the window. "Hello, my name is Emma, and I am all alone," the board read. Mary continued staring into her phone, watching Emma erase the board and begin writing again. As she wrote, Mary noticed the young woman looking back over her shoulder, as if she was responding to something. "What's going on, Emma?" Mary asked herself, frustrated that she didn't have a way to respond to the young woman. A moment later, the whiteboard was pressed up against the window. Mary adjusted her camera so that she could read it. "My parents are like those people outside. They are at my door, so I have to turn out the light now." Mary nodded, clicking on the flashlight and shining it on her hand as she extended a thumbs up, hoping that Emma could see it from so far away. A few moments later, the young girl's light clicked off, shrouding her in darkness. "Well, Emma, I hope you get some rest tonight. I suppose I should do the same," Mary said. She looked down at her ropes, checking each one of them again to make sure they were secure. She stared at the post extending out from the pole, trying to envision a way for her to sleep. After running through several different ideas, the only one that made sense was dangling off the side and letting the ropes hold her up. "Look at it like this, girl. If the ropes hold up, you get a good night's sleep. If they don't, then you'll be dead before you fully wake up. Either way, it's not going to be an issue." With a defeated sigh, Mary got herself in position to sleep for the night, knowing that if she was going to have any chance at survival tomorrow, she was going to need her rest. Chapter 3. Mary dangled from the top of the streetlight pole, her arms and legs hanging loose as she stared up into the blue sky above. She groaned from the tightness in her back, a painful result of spending the night secured by climbing ropes. Even though her only desire was to remain motionless to minimize the discomfort, she forced herself to get moving, pulling herself back up to the top of the pole. It took a few moments for her to get situated, wincing as she got into position. "You just had to be cheap, didn't you, Mary? Couldn't spring for the hammock, could you?" She muttered to herself as she squirmed around to get into a comfortable position. After several adjustments, she found one that minimized the pain. "I guess that's as good as it's going to get today." Mary looked down at the zombie mob below, which had grown during the night. She began counting, giving up after reaching 15, which barely put a dent into their numbers. "What's the point? It's more than I can handle, which is all I really need to know." Mary flinched as a handful of gunshots popped off in the distance. She looked around for the source, hoping that it was coming from the military or police. However, they fell silent as quickly as they had started up. "Oh, come on, don't do that to me. Come rescue me. Or at the very least, send one flying my way so I don't have to be eaten alive." Mary stopped herself, shaking her head to put out the negative thoughts. "Come on, girl. That's dark even for you. I mean, sure, you have no food or water, and if you don't make a run for it in the next few hours, you're probably not going to have the energy to do it, but at least try and stay positive." Mary looked over to the house where young Emma resided, spotting her in the window waving at her. With a half smile and a flick of the wrist, she returned the gesture. "Yeah, good morning to you too, Emma. I don't suppose you have a slingshot handy so you can send me a muffin or something?" Mary let out a chuckle, dropping her head in a fit of despair. Positive thoughts. Come on, positive thoughts. Despite pleading with herself, she kept her head down, raising it only when she heard another gunshot pop off. Unlike the others from earlier, this one was relatively close, just down the street a few blocks. Oh, come on, please be something good. Mary moved around on the pole, positioning herself so that she could look down the road. While the gunshot stopped, the sound was replaced by a low rumbling noise, one that she couldn't place in her mind. Another tense minute passed as she silently prayed that whatever was making the noise continued coming in her direction. Much to her relief, the sound continued to grow in intensity. Maybe I'm crazy, but that sounds like a vehicle. Something big too. Mary continued staring, watching as ghouls from all directions converged in the street and rushed out of sight. After several more moments, the front edge of a school bus emerged into view. Thank God. Mary reached into her pocket, pulling out her cell phone and clicking on the flashlight. Even though the sun was up, she hoped that it would be powerful enough to signal whoever was behind the wheel. Come on, you see this. You know you see this. As if on cue, a loud honking sound reverberated through the neighborhood, followed by the top lights on the bus flashing bright. Mary pumped her fist in celebration at being noticed. Hell yeah. Mary watched as the school bus moved at a slow, deliberate pace through the growing horde of zombies. Whoever was driving put safety at the top of their priority list, gently pushing through the horde while carefully navigating around the wrecked cars. Several minutes passed before the bus got close. The driver gently pulled up to the light pole, parking just underneath it. Okay, girl, let's get moving. Mary began undoing some of her safety lines before loosening the final one so that she could slide down. Once she was ready to move, it only took a moment for her to make her way to the top of the bus. With a deft flick of the wrist, she freed herself from the safety line before leaning down and knocking on the roof. Mary spun around in response to a loud crashing sound resonating from the rear of the bus, bracing herself for trouble. She relaxed after spotting an older man popping his head out from a hatch. Easy there, sorry about that, the man said. I thought I had a good grip on that hatch, but it was heavier than I thought. It's okay. I didn't have my coffee this morning, so that was a nice substitute to wake me up. Mary walked casually over towards the hatch, extending her hand to shake the old man's. I'm Mary. Thanks for stopping to pick me up. I'm Charles, but you should really thank Lucy. She's the one who spotted you up there. Charles took a step down from the hatch, getting himself situated on the seats before reaching his hand up to assist Mary. She smirked while waving him off, climbing down with ease before dropping straight to the floor of the bus. I'm a bit of a climber, which is how I ended up on top of the pole. I'm sure there's a story there, and you'll have to share once we get to safety. We need to make a stop first. I'm not the navigator. Well, who is? Lucy, the driver. Mary nodded and began marching up the aisle to the front of the bus. Before she got halfway up, the driver spun around to stare her down. The older woman looked like she had been through hell, blood covering the front of her shirt, which really brought out the rage in her eyes. Welcome aboard the express bus to hell. Have a seat, and I'll do my best to get us out of here. Lucy, we need to make a stop first. I'm sorry, but no detours. This road takes us straight out of town, and I intend on following it for as long as I can. As fate would have it, we don't have to leave the road. I just need you to drive across the street. There's a young girl trapped in her house. Lucy let out a long, drawn-out sigh as she contemplated the request. Mary leaned over, pointing out the house in question, prompting a vigorous head shake from the driver. That's a no-go right there. I'm sorry. What? Why? Because the driveway is filled up, so there's no way to the house. What about the front yard? I'm not going off-road with this baby unless I'm absolutely forced to do so. Are you telling me that saving a young girl's life isn't worth getting the tires dirty? Lucy pointed to the folding door at the side of the bus, where a swarm of ghouls was pressed up against it. I feel for her, but we're all screwed if I pull up and get stuck. Mary let out a frustrated grunt, looking for another solution. After a moment, inspiration struck. Are you okay with driving onto the sidewalk? Lucy nodded. Yeah, sidewalks are okay, but what good is that going to do? Mary pointed across the street towards the giant tree in the front yard. The limb stretched out from the road all the way to the bedroom window. I'm a climber, so if I can get a boost up to the limb, I'll be good to go. Grab the girl, and we'll be back in the bus in no time flat. That better be the case because staying put for too long isn't ideal. Lucy pointed over to the folding door at the side of the bus, where a swarm of ghouls was pressed up against it. Most were thrashing violently against the glass, trying to break through, but occasionally, a zombie hand would get stuck between the doors, causing them to move just enough to frighten the occupants. Don't worry, I'll be quick. Okay, get back there and get into position. I'll get you over there. Thank you. Don't say thank you until we're rolling out of town. Mary gave Lucy a nod before walking towards the rear of the bus. She locked eyes with Charles, who was glued to his seat as the vehicle began to move again. Do you think you can climb up to the roof? Charles scoffed. I'm old, not dead. I might need a hand, but I can get up there. But why? I'm going to need a boost up to a tree limb. Did you not get your fill of heights overnight? Once a climber, always a climber. Fair enough. Both of them braced themselves as Lucy weaved through the traffic jam, making a U-turn to head back towards the house. There were a few bumps as she pulled them up onto the sidewalk, which settled as soon as they stopped. Okay, get your ass moving. You got it. Mary reached into her bag, grabbing both of her climbing tools before planting her feet on a seat. With a quick hop, she was through the hatch, reaching down for Charles, who moved a little slower. Once they were both situated on the top of the bus, Charles dropped down to one knee, cupping his hands together in front of his body, giving the climber a nod. Whenever you're ready, I'll boost you up. Mary gave him a confident nod before stepping forward, planting her foot in his hands and leaping up as he stood up. The boost was just enough to allow her to get one hand on the limb, using her other hand to plant the tip of her climbing tool into the wood. Charles watched from below as Mary deftly wrapped her legs around the limb, maneuvering around for a moment before pulling herself up to the top. I'll be right back. Keep that engine running. Charles gave her a half-hearted thumbs up as she balanced herself on the giant limb, walking across to the center of the tree. Mary studied the layout for a moment, making sure she was walking down the correct limb before moving. Mary carefully balanced on the large limb, which grew thinner the closer she got to the house. She stopped herself once she felt the limb beginning to dip, not wanting to risk it snapping off and sending her into the sea of ghouls below. It's just a couple feet. You got this, girl. Mary took a deep breath before jumping off the limb, landing on a small portion of roof that extended out from the windows. She grabbed onto the overhang, steadying herself before walking over towards the bedroom window. As she approached, Emma opened it up and stuck her head out. Hey Emma, get your stuff because we have to move. Chapter 4. Emma watched Mary walk over the final few steps to her window, reaching out her hand to help her rescue her into her room. Thank you for coming to get me, Emma said. Sure thing. But we have to go, Mary replied. Emma nodded, grabbing a small bag off the ground and flinging it over her shoulder before climbing up into the window. Mary's attention was pulled over to the bedroom door, where violent banging started up, the creatures on the other side being drawn to their talking. Mary continued staring, watching the pressure on the other side of the door causing it to break away from the frame. The only reinforcement Emma had put against it was a small table, which moved with every shove against the door. We have to go now, Mary urged. Emma stopped in the window, hesitant to move for fear of slipping off the slanted rooftop. Where do I go? Just start moving down to the next window, and I'll help you get across to the branch, Mary instructed. Emma took a deep breath to steady herself before stepping out onto the rooftop, keeping one hand firmly on the window frame. She planted her feet firmly, making sure she was on solid footing before exiting the bedroom. Mary turned around, watching helplessly as the bedroom door broke away from the hinges. On the other side was Emma's zombified family. Mom, Dad, and her older brother pressed against the broken door, thrashing about and pushing the blockage out of their way. Jesus Christ, Mary exclaimed. Mary jumped up into the window, flinging herself outside while plunging one of her climbing tools into the side of the frame. The anchor provided her with enough stability to pull herself to the side just before the lead zombie, the mother, reached the window. The creature lunged at the fresh prey, only to be shoved in the back by the others, sending it headfirst out the window. The ghoul reached out towards Mary as it slid down the steep rooftop, narrowly missing her leg before tumbling to the ground below. The other two zombies emerged from the window, both of them reaching out for Mary, their fingertips touching her arm as she pulled away. With a forceful pull, she yanked the climbing tool free from its mooring, removing her stability in the process. "Oh shit!" Mary cried out. Mary began sliding down the roof, flailing around as she went. With a panicked thrust, she sent the tip of one of her climbing tools towards the house, relieved when it pierced through the shingles. Mary's legs dangled over the side of the house, exciting the creatures below. She strained her arm muscles, pulling herself back up to her feet. Once her footing was stable, she yanked the tool free and carefully made her way over to Emma. "Are you okay?" Emma asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Come on, let's get you over to the branch," Mary reassured her. Mary got behind Emma, putting her hands on her waist. "Okay, on 3, I want you to jump as far as you can. I'm going to boost you. When you hit the tree, I want you to drop down and wrap your arms around the branch. Do you understand?" "I can do that," Emma said. "Good. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. With the countdown complete, Mary lifted Emma up off the ground as she jumped, pushing her with everything she could muster. The teenager flew through the air, bear hugging the tree branch as she landed on it. She let out a grunt on impact before sliding along it to make room for her new friend. "Are you okay?" Mary asked. "I'm fine. And I won't move until you get here," Emma replied. Mary took a couple of steps back, planting her back against the window to give herself as much of a runway as she could. She stared at the branch, letting out a grunt before pushing off and rushing towards the edge. With a forceful push off, she flew through the air, landing on the branch with ease. Mary made sure her footing was sound before walking over to help Emma to her feet. "Okay, one step at a time, we're going to take it slow and get over to the bus." Before Emma could respond, Lucy honked the horn of the bus, pulling Mary's attention that way. She looked down at the driver, waving frantically for them to hurry up. "Okay, change of plans. We're going to move as fast as we can so that Lucy doesn't leave us behind. I'll keep my hand on you." "I can do that," Emma confirmed. The two of them moved as one, Mary guiding the young teenager across the branches and over to the bus. Charles stood atop the vehicle, raising his arms and motioning for Emma to drop. "Come on, girl, I'll catch you," Charles called. Mary nodded to her younger counterpart, keeping a grip on her as she lowered herself onto the branch. As soon as she was in position, she let go, dropping to the top of the bus. "Get inside," Charles said. Charles gently pushed her towards the open hatch before turning his attention back to Mary, who waved him out of the way. He complied with the request, taking a couple of steps back and clearing a path for her to land safely. With a leap and tumble forward, she reached the roof of the bus with ease. "I'm good. Get down below," Mary instructed. Charles complied, rushing over to the hatch and climbing. He was barely halfway down before Lucy began yelling at him. Mary couldn't hear what was being said, but it caused him to freeze in place. "What is it?" Mary asked. "One of those things has its arm inside the door," Charles replied. "Tell her to get moving." "I'll take care of it," Mary said firmly. Charles nodded and yelled up to Lucy as Mary marched up towards the front. She stumbled a bit as the bus lurched forward, bouncing around as it got off the sidewalk and back to the street. Mary continued walking to the front as carefully as she could, stopping close to the edge just above the door. She looked down as one ghoul had its arm wedged in between the folding portions of the door, pushing its way through. She looked down at her two climbing tools, shaking her head at the plan running through her mind. "You're crazy, girl. Just don't screw this up." Mary dropped down to one knee, raising one of her makeshift weapons above her head and driving the tip into the roof as hard as she could. She gave it a tug, making sure it was secure before dangling off the side of the bus. Mary pressed her feet against the glass, leaning down so that she was within reach of the trapped zombie. As the vehicle pressed through the crowd of ghouls on the street, this one staggered alongside it, being dragged along as they went. The creature looked up just as Mary plunged the tip of her climbing tool into its forehead, rendering it lifeless within seconds. She stared at it for several moments, making sure it was dead before yanking it free. The lifeless corpse slid down to the ground, eventually getting caught up on other creatures and being pulled free from the bus. Mary swung her other tool, piercing the side of the bus for extra stability so that she could easily pull herself back up. Once up top, she sat there for a few moments, breathing a sigh of relief that the immediate danger had passed. After enjoying the breeze for a moment, she pulled herself up and walked back to the hatch, sliding through and landing softly inside. "Are we okay, Mary?" Charles asked. "I took out that thing by the door, so as long as we don't stop again, we should be okay," Mary replied. Mary took a single step before Emma rushed over, wrapping her arms around her tightly. "Thank you, Mary." "Thank you." "Thank you," Emma said. Mary pulled the young girl tight, letting her feel safe for a few moments before gently patting her on the back. "I need to go talk to Lucy for a minute, but I'll be right back, I promise," Mary assured her. "Come on, I got some snacks in the back cooler. Let's go grab something," Charles offered. "Pick me out something tasty," Mary said, giving the teenager a wink before walking to the front of the bus. She took a knee beside Lucy, who was focused on the relatively clear road ahead. "So, any idea where we're going?" Mary asked. "We're not too far from the city limits, so I'm hoping things thin out a bit once we hit it," Lucy responded. "And after that?" Mary pressed. "We got half a tank of gas, so there's bound to be some small town we can get to. So just sit back and enjoy the ride." Mary could tell by Lucy's tone that she wasn't in the mood to be bothered by questions. Rather than push the issue, she walked back towards the others, just relieved that she wasn't on the top of the light pole any longer. Back at the bar, Mary stared off into the distance for a moment, cracking a smile as she remembered the feeling of finally being safe. "So where did you end up?" Smitty asked. "This little town called Mount Hope. One of those blink and you miss it towns that dotted the Kansas landscape," Mary replied. "I've driven through the state a few times. I know those towns well," Smitty said. "Yeah, we found some friendly folks there who let us stay until the military showed up. After that, it was a bit of a shit show," Mary admitted. "How so?" Smitty asked. Mary smirked as she held up her nearly empty glass. "Sorry, but that story is going to require a much larger glass. But I have to warn you, it's not the most exciting tale that's ever been told." "Fair enough. I might take a rain check on that one," Smitty replied. "I don't blame you," Mary said. "So what happened to the others, if you don't mind me asking?" Smitty inquired. "Lucy got recruited by the military right after they arrived. Once they heard how well she could handle a bus, they put her to work ferrying people out of danger zones. I never saw her again after that, but knowing her, she's still alive and salty as ever," Mary explained. "What about Charles and Emma?" Smitty asked. Emma had an aunt who owned a farm in the northern part of the state. She pleaded with the military to take her up there, but they refused. So Charles helped her out, borrowing someone's truck and driving her up there. As far as I know, they made it because, by that point, the military was clearing the major roads," Mary said. "So why didn't you go with them?" Smitty asked. "I wanted to get over to Kansas City and find my sister and her kids. After hearing the horror stories coming out of that offensive from some of the soldiers, I feared for the worst. But they got out safely," Mary replied. "Are they in Seattle?" Smitty asked. "They are. They have their own apartment. They wanted me to move in with them, but, it's one thing to deal with those creatures. But I draw the line at living with children," Mary said. Smitty let out a laugh, nodding in agreement. "That's a completely different level of horror. For sure," Smitty joked. Mary smiled, grabbing her glass and downing the last of her drink. "Well, Smitty, I think that's about all I have for you. I do appreciate you sharing with me and future listeners. So far, you're winning the most unique location award," Smitty said. Does that mean I get another drink? Mary chuckled at her semi-serious ask. For his part, Smitty put on a big smile, gently shaking his head. I tell you what, when I wrap up this portion of my project, if you're still the winner, I'll give you another drink. But it'll cost you the military story. You, sir, have a deal, Mary said. Mary extended her hand for a shake, Smitty happily reciprocating. Before either could say another word, the table in the back piped up, whistling to get Smitty's attention. As he turned, he saw them pointing at their empty glasses, one of them holding up a fistful of rations. Looks like you have some work to do, so I'll get out of your hair, Mary said. Mary froze, an embarrassed look forming on her face as she stared at his bald head. Smitty broke into laughter, rubbing his chrome dome. I am so sorry, Mary said. It's all good. The look on your face was worth it, Smitty chuckled. I'm going to go before I put my foot in my mouth again. I'll see you soon, Smitty, Mary said. I look forward to it, Smitty replied. Smitty gave a friendly wave to Mary as she hurried out of the bar. He reached down to the tape recorder, clicking it off and setting it behind the bar for safekeeping. Until the next one. The end.